Everyone's talking about Baldur's Gate 3, but CRPGs go way back. They're story-driven PC RPGs, full of choices, consequences, and freedom. And while some became legends, many incredible ones were forgotten. Today, I'll show you 12 hidden CRPGs you've probably never played. From cult classics to modern indie experiments, these are the games that prove CRPGs are still ahead of their time. Arcanum is one of the most ambitious CRPGs ever made, yet today it remains a cult classic known only to a dedicated few. Released in 2001 by Troika Games, the studio founded by former Fallout developers, it dared to do something no RPG had tried before: combine high fantasy with industrial-age steampunk. In this world, orcs and elves share space with rifles, locomotives, and factories, while magic and technology constantly clash. You play as the sole survivor of a Zeppelin crash, thrown into a massive open world filled with factions, mysteries, and moral choices. What makes Arcanum unforgettable is its sheer freedom. You could approach situations in countless ways, use diplomacy, brute force, stealth, or rely on magical and technological skills that often conflicted with each other. A mage might find technology unreliable, while a tech-focused character could struggle in magical areas. This tension forced you to shape your identity carefully, and every choice carried weight. The game also let you roleplay almost anything: a noble diplomat, a gunsmith tinkerer, a necromancer, or even a pacifist. Visually, the isometric graphics were rough even in 2001, and the interface felt clunky. But the storytelling, dialogue, and branching quests were unmatched. Arcanum is the kind of RPG where no two players' journeys look the same, and that replay value has kept it alive for 2 decades. Though it never reached mainstream success, it's remembered as one of the boldest CRPGs ever released. A game that proved creativity and player freedom can outweigh polish and graphics. Temple of Elemental Evil is often described as one of the most faithful adaptations of Dungeons & Dragons rules ever brought to a computer screen. Released in 2003 by Troika Games, it used the 3.5 edition of the tabletop rule set, almost line by line, something that made it both a dream and a nightmare depending on the player. On one hand, it offered an incredibly deep and tactical combat system, with turn-based encounters that demanded careful planning, positioning, and knowledge of spells and abilities. On the other, it could be punishing and overwhelming for newcomers who weren't used to such strict adherence to D&D mechanics. The game begins with your party arriving near the village of Hamlet, only to be drawn into the mystery of the dreaded Temple of Elemental Evil itself. Unlike many RPGs that focus heavily on stories and character dialogue, this one leaned hard into dungeon crawling. Exploration and combat were the core experience, with massive battles against orcs, undead, and cultists that tested every aspect of your party build. Players who enjoyed tactical depth found it immensely rewarding, while others found it brutal. Despite its rough launch, plagued with bugs and technical issues, fans created patches and mods that eventually turned Temple of Elemental Evil into a much smoother experience. Today, it's considered a cult classic among CRPG fans who crave tactical precision. It might not have had the storytelling strength of Baldur's Gate, but for those who wanted to experience D&D combat in its purest digital form, no other game has ever matched its dedication.
You are a fate binder.
Tyranny is one of those CRPGs that slipped under the radar, even though it came from Obsidian, the studio behind Pillars of Eternity and Fallout New Vegas. Released in 2016, it dared to flip the classic RPG formula on its head. Instead of being the hero saving the world, you step into the role of a fate binder, a judge and enforcer serving under Kairos, an overlord who has already conquered the land. The war is over. Evil has already won, and now you decide how to enforce that rule. This setup changes everything about how you play. Your decisions shape how the conquered people see you. Will you rule with mercy or crush resistance without hesitation? Choices are constant, from small interactions to major events, and the branching narrative ensures your story is different from anyone else's. Unlike many RPGs where morality is black and white, Tyranny lives in shades of gray. Even mercy can lead to unintended consequences, and cruelty sometimes brings stability. The combat system builds on Pillars of Eternity's real-time with pause mechanics, letting you control a party of companions with unique abilities and personalities. The mix of tactical positioning, spell combos, and synergy makes every fight challenging. What makes Tyranny stand out, though, is how much weight the story carries compared to the battles. Dialogue, reputation, and alliances define your path just as much as combat. While it never reached the popularity of bigger CRPGs, Tyranny remains a bold experiment, one of the few RPGs that truly lets you play on the side of power, shaping a world where good has already lost. It's a game that makes you question not just your character's morality, but your own. UnderRail is one of the purest indie CRPGs ever made, and also one of the toughest. Released in 2015 by a tiny Serbian studio called Stygian Software, it's clearly inspired by the classic Fallout games. But instead of being set on the scorched surface of the Earth, the entire story takes place underground. Humanity has retreated to massive metro systems, where isolated stations have become city-states constantly fighting over resources, technology, and survival. You step into this world as a newcomer, carving your place in a society where danger lurks around every corner. The game uses an isometric perspective with turn-based combat, very reminiscent of Fallout 1 and 2. However, what sets UnderRail apart is its depth and unforgiving design. Character creation is highly flexible, allowing for a huge variety of builds, from gunslingers and assassins to psychics and engineers who rely on traps and gadgets. But the game is brutal. Enemies hit hard, resources are scarce, and poor planning can doom your character before you even realize it. Success requires careful strategy, knowledge of your build, and patience. Atmosphere is another highlight. The underground world feels oppressive and bleak, with dim tunnels, political intrigue, and factions constantly at odds. Every step forward feels earned, and the tension never lets up. While it doesn't hold your hand, the reward for persevering is a deeply immersive and satisfying experience that few modern CRPGs deliver. UnderRail is not a game for everyone, but for those who love hardcore RPGs where choices matter and survival is never guaranteed, it's one of the best hidden gems of the last decade. Atom RPG is often described as the Soviet Fallout, and it earns that name. Released in 2018 by Atom Team, a small indie studio from Russia, it takes the classic Fallout formula and places it in a distinctly Eastern setting. Instead of a devastated America, the nuclear apocalypse here unfolds across the Soviet Union, giving the game a tone, culture, and atmosphere that feels both familiar and refreshingly different. You play as a survivor wandering ruined villages, hidden bunkers, and dangerous wastelands. The gameplay is isometric and turn-based, built around action points, skill checks, and harsh resource management. Every bullet counts, every healing item is precious, and combat punishes mistakes. What sets Atom RPG apart, though, is its personality. Dialogue is sharp, darkly funny, and full of Soviet references, making even small conversations feel unique. The game thrives on choice and consequence. Almost every encounter can be solved in multiple ways: diplomacy, brute force, or clever use of skills. But each decision ripples outward, sometimes leading to surprising outcomes. The world doesn't bend to your will. It reacts to you, often in unforgiving ways. While it lacks the polish of big-budget RPGs, Atom RPG shines through its atmosphere and depth. It captures the spirit of the old-school Fallout games: freedom, challenge, and role-playing flexibility, while adding a voice of its own. For anyone who loves classic CRPGs but wants something darker and culturally different, Atom RPG is one of the most underrated gems of the last decade. Colony Ship is one of the most fascinating modern CRPGs you've probably never played. Released in early access in 2021 by Iron Tower Studio, the same developers behind Age of Decadence, it carries that same DNA of harsh choices, branching paths, and unforgiving consequences. But instead of a crumbling fantasy world, the setting here is pure sci-fi. A massive generation ship carrying humanity's descendants on a centuries-long voyage to a distant planet. The ship itself has become society, and over time it fractured into factions, ideologies, and constant political conflict. You step into this world as just another inhabitant of the colony, with no grand destiny waiting. From the start, your survival depends on alliances, reputation, and how you choose to interact with the factions that control different parts of the ship. Like Age of Decadence, combat is brutal and tactical, rewarding careful planning but punishing mistakes. Dialogue and choices are just as important as combat, with entire storylines opening or closing depending on your words. What makes Colony Ship stand out is how grounded it feels. Every decision is political, every favor comes at a cost, and survival is never guaranteed. The atmosphere of being trapped inside a deteriorating ship full of clashing groups creates tension at every step. It doesn't hold your hand, but for players who enjoy CRPGs with depth, challenge, and freedom, Colony Ship is shaping up to be one of the most ambitious indie RPGs of its generation. Age of Decadence is one of the most hardcore CRPGs ever made, and that's exactly what makes it so memorable. Released in 2015 by Iron Tower Studio, it built a reputation as a game that refuses to hold your hand. Set in a crumbling empire inspired by the fall of Rome, it's a world of political intrigue, betrayal, and survival. Unlike most RPGs, there's no chosen one here. You're just another person trying to carve out a place in a collapsing society, and the game never lets you forget that. What sets Age of Decadence apart is its radical non-linearity. From the very beginning, you can align with different factions, betray them, or strike out on your own, and each choice drastically changes the story. The branching paths are so wide that it's impossible to see everything in one playthrough, and in fact, many builds will lock you out of entire quest lines. Combat is turn-based, but it's punishing and often stacked against you. Victory comes from careful planning, clever use of skills, and sometimes knowing when to avoid a fight altogether. The role-playing depth is immense. Skills like persuasion, streetwise, or trading often matter just as much as combat ability, and many quests can be solved without ever drawing a weapon. It's a game that constantly rewards creative thinking and punishes reckless decisions. Age of Decadence isn't easy, and it's not for everyone, but for players who crave freedom, consequence, and a world that feels brutally real, it's one of the most unique CRPG experiences of the past decade, a forgotten masterpiece for those willing to take the challenge. Conquistador is one of the most overlooked CRPGs of its era, yet also one of the most daring. Released in 2013 by Logic artists, it puts you in charge of a Spanish expedition to the New World during the 16th century. Instead of a chosen hero or fantasy setting, you're the leader of a crew of soldiers, scouts, and scholars, tasked with surviving exploration, disease, and conflict in unfamiliar lands. The gameplay blends tactical, turn-based battles with survival and resource management. Every decision matters: rationing food, keeping morale high, and deciding when to fight or negotiate. When combat breaks out, it unfolds on a grid where positioning, terrain, and unit abilities decide victory or defeat. Unlike most RPGs, it doesn't focus only on combat. Diplomacy, leadership, and careful planning are just as critical to success. What makes Conquistador so unique is its narrative tone. You constantly face moral choices about how to deal with native tribes, rival factions, and even your own people. Do you act with cruelty to maintain control, or try diplomacy at the risk of appearing weak? The game forces you to consider the consequences of colonization in a way few RPGs ever attempt. While it never reached mainstream fame, Conquistador became a cult classic for players who appreciate strategy and storytelling with historical weight. It's challenging, morally complex, and still stands out today as one of the boldest indie CRPGs of the 2010s. Black Geyser is one of the more recent attempts to revive the spirit of the Infinity Engine classics, and while it didn't gain the spotlight of Baldur's Gate or Pillars of Eternity, it's still a hidden gem worth noting. Released in 2021 by Grape Ocean Technologies, this indie CRPG was made by a small team, but their love for the genre shows in every part of the design. It's isometric, party-based, and filled with choices, offering that old-school style of role-playing with a few modern twists. The story drops you into a world slowly being consumed by greed, literally. A strange curse spreads through the land, fueling conflict and corruption. As the player, you lead a party through political intrigue, dangerous wilderness, and dungeons, all while deciding whether to resist or embrace the lure of greed. This central theme gives the narrative a unique flavor compared to other fantasy CRPGs. Gameplay feels familiar if you've played Baldur's Gate or Icewind Dale. Real-time with pause combat allows for tactical party management, and the game features plenty of spells, abilities, and loot to experiment with. While not as polished as bigger titles, the mechanics are deep enough to satisfy fans who crave that classic experience. Dialogue and choices carry weight, with different factions and outcomes depending on your actions. Black Geyser may not have broken into the mainstream, but it stands as proof that even small studios can capture the essence of old-school CRPGs. For players hungry for another taste of that Infinity Engine magic, this is one of the more overlooked releases of the last few years. Encased is a modern CRPG that slipped under most players' radar, yet it offers one of the most unique post-apocalyptic settings in years. Released in 2021 by Dark Crystal Games, it blends Fallout-style role-playing with a distinctly Soviet sci-fi atmosphere. Instead of barren wastelands, the game takes place beneath the Dome, a massive alien structure that alters reality itself. Technology malfunctions, strange phenomena occur, and countless explorers risk their lives inside its mysterious boundaries. You play as a recruit working for one of 5 factions, each with its own goals and philosophy. Right from the start, choices matter: who you serve, who you betray, and how you approach survival. The story branches widely, filled with moral dilemmas, faction politics, and philosophical questions about ambition and corruption. Dialogue is just as important as combat, with reputation shaping how the world reacts to you. Gameplay combines turn-based tactical battles with deep character customization. Skills and perks allow you to build anything from a silver-tongued diplomat to a hardened soldier or stealthy scavenger. Encased doesn't hold your hand. Resources are scarce, enemies are dangerous, and every decision carries weight. What makes the game shine is its atmosphere. The combination of Soviet-inspired design, eerie alien mystery, and subtle dark humor creates a mood that feels different from any other CRPG. While it never achieved big success, Encased remains a hidden gem for players who love tough choices, exploration, and a world that feels unsettlingly real. Hordes of the Underdark is one of the most ambitious CRPG expansions ever made, and yet many players never experienced it. Released in 2003 as the second expansion to BioWare's Neverwinter Nights, it took everything the base game established and pushed it to epic new heights. While the original campaign was fairly grounded, Hordes sent you deep into the Underdark, the vast, hostile world beneath Faerun, and gave you a story filled with political intrigue, betrayal, and battles against some of Dungeons & Dragons' most iconic villains. The scale was impressive for its time. Instead of small skirmishes, the expansion let you face large armies, powerful demons, and even dragons. Your character could reach higher levels than ever before, unlocking epic feats and abilities that truly made you feel like a legendary hero. Party management also felt more refined, with companions that added personality and tactical options to the adventure. What made Hordes stand out wasn't just the combat, but the storytelling. Choices in dialogue and alliances mattered, and the moral weight of your actions shaped the path ahead. Combined with the freedom of the Aurora engine, it gave players the chance to experience a campaign that felt like a true tabletop epic brought to life. Though often overshadowed by Baldur's Gate or Knights of the Old Republic, Hordes of the Underdark remains one of BioWare's best works. For CRPG fans, it's still one of the finest examples of how to build an expansion that doesn't just add content, but elevates the entire experience. Viking is the follow-up to Conquistador, and while it never broke into the mainstream, it's one of the most creative CRPGs of the last decade. Released in 2017 by Logic artists, it shifts the focus from colonization of the Americas to the harsh life of Norse clans in the Viking Age. Instead of leading an expedition into foreign lands, you play as the newly appointed chieftain of a small clan, responsible for its survival, prosperity, and legacy. The game mixes CRPG storytelling with clan management. You must make choices about politics, diplomacy, and warfare, while also handling the everyday needs of your people. Resources are limited, alliances fragile, and every decision can strengthen or weaken your hold as leader. When it comes to combat, Viking uses tactical turn-based battles similar to Conquistador, but refined with better systems and more variety. Positioning, morale, and the abilities of your warriors all matter, and one mistake can cost you dearly. What sets Viking apart is its sense of culture and identity. The world feels grounded in Norse history, with sagas, traditions, and conflicts shaping the narrative. You're constantly deciding between diplomacy and aggression, tradition and ambition, survival and honor. The choices you make not only define your character, but also the fate of your entire clan. While it didn't gain wide attention, Viking offered a rare blend of role-playing depth and historical setting. For players looking for a CRPG that feels different from the usual fantasy or sci-fi worlds, it's a hidden gem that still deserves recognition. And that wraps up today's journey. 12 classic CRPGs that many players overlooked. Yet each one left a mark on the genre. Some were bold experiments, others hidden gems that never reached the spotlight. But all of them prove that creativity and depth often come from the most unexpected places. Which of these would you play first? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more forgotten RPG treasures.